Hello and welcome into a special fantasy football edition of the Hecklers podcast. I am your host, Gordon Coletto, and joining me once again, the wizard of the waiver wire, Billy. Billy, how are you doing?
I'm good. It feels like summer's ending and football's finally here.
That is true, although I will say it is far too hot for my comfort here in Charlotte, North Carolina. It doesn't feel like football weather, but football is back on the TV, so I will take it. We have a number of fantasy football drafts coming up in the next few weeks. So I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to get together and preview the fantasy football season. Specifically, our dynasty drafts are completed. So we're really going to be focusing in on our redrafts and talking about how we like to approach those drafts. So with that, I actually do want to just kick off and say, I really want to know how you approach the draft as it relates to strategy. So the biggest thing I'm curious about is when you're going into a draft, specifically a redraft, are you going into it with a planned strategy and sort of taking best available within that strategy when you're on the clock? Or are you kind of going for more of a read and react to the draft real time?
So when I go into a draft, I like to, for my first two picks, it's sort of like, in the NFL, they say the first, 10 to 15 plays are scripted. I kind of feel like my first two picks are scripted. Like I have a couple guys who are projected to go around where I'm picking. Um, and those are the guys that I'm targeting. Obviously, like we've all been in those drafts where like two quarterbacks will go and it throws off the whole draft. And so you get someone you didn't anticipate being there. So in that scenario, you kind of have to react and determine, do you want that guy or do you stick with who you originally thought? Um, so usually can't go wrong in the first round, right? But in the second round, I usually have a list of guys where I'm like, I'm not drafting this person. Last year it was Devontae Adams, where I was just like, I don't like his situation. I'm not taking him in the second round. So that's typically, I typically kind of know what I want to do, but inevitably there is a level of reaction that you have to have.
Yeah, I mean, I think I approach it from a similar position where I like to come into a draft a with a couple strategies, just kind of depending, normally we don't know where we're going to pick this year. In one of our leagues, at least, we do know where we're going to pick, which is nice. So I kind of have a little bit more clarity. But, the strategy can vary so widely depending on where you pick in like a 12-person league. And, inevitably, you and I, especially over the past few drafts that we've done together, we always sort of end up in that 10 to 12 range, which is just the most obnoxious thing I can think of.
I swear every year.
It,
It's
it,
not
it
even that I mind picking there, it's just I'd like some variability to it.
well, and then the other problem we always end up having is we inevitably always pick very close to each other in these drafts for some reason. And you and I share a lot of, we talk about players a ton. We share a lot of opinions, and inevitably we always end up stealing from each other, which is a frustrating experience. Which is also why I'm going to watch what I say on this podcast, because you're drafting fifth and I'm drafting seventh in the one league that we do know. So I'm gonna keep that, keep some of my strategies to myself. But to get back to my point, I think I like to go in. So say for instance you're looking at a two receiver strategy or a hero running back strategy. I like to at least map out what those look like at different parts of the first round so that I can kind of react to wherever I'm drafting and then decide which strategy to play. And then I kind of go from there. Inevitably, I'm horrible at sticking to the script when it comes to draft strategy. I feel like I get caught up in the board. And I always say one of my big things on draft day is always like, you don't want to be reacting to the board, like you want to be controlling the board. So you don't want to be like chasing a run on running backs or chasing a run on receivers. Like you want to be doing your bidding, getting the positions that you need at max possible ADP value with each pick. And it's so, I don't know, it's just so hard. Like I find it's really easy to abandon your strategy and like panic pick basically.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've had instances, and I think that's more like where I feel that. is more like rounds 3 through 6,
Hmm.
where someone, went a little higher than I thought, that I thought I was going to be able to steal with my pick. And then it throws off the rest of my draft because you'll get to a point where it's like, well, there's nobody here that I really want to take.
Yeah.
So I might as well, I'll just take a receiver because they've been flying off the board.
Well, and I think about last year's draft that we did together in full time fantasy, and it was you took Garrett Wilson. I want to say, were you picking like eighth, maybe, or maybe even later than that?
I
But you
think
took
I picked 10th.
okay. I think I was 12 last year, and you were 10. So you took Garrett Wilson.
Well, I took Bijan and then I took Garrett
Oh,
Wilson
that's right. Yeah, you went Bijan, Garrett Wilson. So you kind of went hero RB last year, but it just didn't. I mean,
because
you had
then
a
with my
decent
third
year,
pick,
but
I took or no, that was a different draft. Different
yeah.
draft,
So, I mean, but I went CD Lamb. I think I picked 11th. So I went CD Lamb. And then by
which
the
was a
time it,
steal.
which was a steal, really great pick. And then by the time it came back around to me at what would have been 12, 13, 14, I think I had a choice of like, Devontae Adams, AJ Brown, and Derrick Henry. And I took Derrick Henry like an idiot. I feel like if I had, and I had gone into that with the intention of going two receivers. And I saw Derrick Henry and I was like, oh, I feel like he'll have a healthy year, which he did for the most part. It just wasn't as productive because it's PPR. So it's like, I allowed myself to get knocked off my strategy, and my team would have been significantly better if I had just went CD Lamb, AJ Brown, and then dealt with running backs later, because we know how much talent came out of like the third, fourth, fifth, sixth round with running backs last year with guys like Pacheco, Kenneth Walker. Um,
Rashid White.
yeah, although we'll talk
Well,
about him in a little bit. But, so I just feel like if I had actually stuck to my strategy, I actually would have been better off last year.
and I think I might be segueing into our next topic, but I don't think the strategy of taking a running back and a wide receiver works all that well. I think you're better off either doing, I'm going to take two running backs in the first 2 rounds or two wide receivers in the first 2 rounds, and then going through your board that way.
So let's talk about that. So yeah, so what there's really two prevailing schools of thought when it comes to uh PPR drafts right now. Um, and that is really a hero running back strategy where you are taking one of these top end elite running backs. So think Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, Brees Hall. Those are the three guys that are mentioned with the hero running back strategy. So you're
I think,
taking,
I mean,
yeah,
I would maybe throw Gibbs in there. Like, I think he has the
well,
potential, but it's a split backfield, which is kind of
that's
messes things up.
Well, and that's the thing. That's why he's not at that level. I'm sorry, but you can't run a hero running back strategy on a split backfield.
Yeah, I mean, the only, I guess, if he's so much better than Montgomery, but you're projecting, so you're right.
Yeah. But realistically, so you have the hero running back strategy where you're taking Brees Hall, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey in round one. And then basically you're not taking another running back until like the sixth round. So from there, it's like rounds two, three, both need to be a receiver. And then you kind of need to decide, do you want to fill your flex receiver spot or do you want to go tight end, quarterback? And that's where you kind of have to get a little bit creative, right? But basically the premise is running back, receiver, receiver, right? Then you have the two receiver idea, which is obviously you take a tier one receiver in round one, right? So this is CD Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? You take a tier one receiver in round one, and then you grab a tier two, or even a tier three in terms of, I'm using Fantasy Pros tiers here, but a tier three, two or three receiver like AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, Puka Nakua, Marvin Harrison, which so realistically, I think you're actually probably in a 12-man league looking at that tier three, which is like Marvin Harrison, Devontae Adams, Drake London, Chris Olave, Mike Evans, right? Like that range. So those are the two schools of thought when it comes to the draft. So which strategy do you prefer, and which draft position do you feel is best suited to that strategy or positions?
So I'm going to take a strategy that Oh no, you did. I'm sorry. I'm going to take the two wide receiver strategy with my first two picks because so
So
if you can
let's.
get a
Oh, go
guy
ahead. Go ahead.
who
Yeah.
produces like Christian McCaffrey, if you hope Bijan produces like that, it's a steal, right? But that's a position that gets hurt all the time. Christian McCaffrey's already hurt. You're hoping that the Falcons use Bijan that way, but we don't have any evidence that they will. And so, and Brees Hall, Aaron Rodgers is healthy, which, Brees Hall stats, I will say will be better, but I don't think they're going to be to that level where it's like, oh, well, this made sense to take him over another wide receiver because realistically, those running backs are going to get hurt more likely than the wide receivers are.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree that running backs feel riskier than receivers. Like the hero running back strategy is carries significantly more risk, but also significantly more upside, I feel.
Oh, yeah, I would agree. Like, if getting CMC last year was a steal.
Mhm.
Now, I
Yeah.
had Bijan for half of the season. I ended up trading him. It wouldn't have mattered if I kept him or not. He didn't keep my team afloat. So did it,
Yeah.
really help me going
And
that strategy? Because that's what I did. I did the hero running back, and it
and
didn't work for me.
and there's talk of Algier being a bigger part of that offense this year. They seem to really like him, and it's it's one of the reasons I personally probably like Brees Hall more than Bijan Robinson. So
Yeah, who's going to steal his carries?
yeah. So you're picking at 5 in one of our drafts. So let's just kind of mock this out. If you were to go with a two receiver strategy. So realistically, let's say Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, CD Lamb, those guys are going off the board top 3. Let's say that the fourth player, for the sake of argument, worst case scenario for you goes Jamar Chase. So, according to a few different rankings at this point, like if you're going to go two receiver, you're really between Amon Ra and Justin Jefferson at 5.
And it's because I've been thinking about this. I personally, I think 5 is not a great spot to be picking
I would rather be in
because,
that 2, 3, 4 range
oh
for
yeah,
for the
because
two
you're
receiver strategy.
because and it's tough. Like Justin Jefferson he's better than Amon Ra is. He just is. They're in a different class,
Sure.
but I know Amon Ra is going to get me 7 catches
Yep.
a game and 80 yards.
Risk mitigation. Yep.
Right, and that's sort of it's tough because how good is Sam Darnold going to be
Yep.
in that offense? Because we
Oh,
know JJ McCarthy's out.
I absolutely think Amon Ra should be above Justin Jefferson. If it was
Yeah,
me,
and
yeah,
that's a tough thing, but then it's like, okay, Justin Jefferson does have more upside.
sure.
It's
But
just
he
his
also has Sam
quarterback
Darnold as
is
his quarterback, lots of turnover there,
right.
very difficult. Plus,
There's a lot of weapons on that offense, but
Jordan Addison will compete for touches. Hawkinson's out.
oh, is he still out?
Yeah, Hawkins is going to miss the whole year, just
Oh,
about.
wow. Oh,
So,
so that okay. Now, flip side. I mean, I know they have Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones has been injury prone. More than likely, they're going to be throwing the ball more than the Lions are because
yeah,
the Lions probably going to have some leads. They're going to want to get Gibbs the ball. They're going to want to get Montgomery the ball. You have Laporta, who's probably going to take a step. I might be talking myself into Justin Jefferson.
I hope you do because I want Amon Ra to fall to me at 7.
Well,
Which
who would
means,
go 6?
well,
You think Bijan?
I need to talk John into taking Bijan because that's the other thing. We have a good friend in between us. So 3 friends picking back to back to back is going to be fun. But yeah, so, but hypothetically, you take Justin Jefferson. So at 5, it's not coming around to you again until, I really wish that there was an easier way to see this, but, effectively, what is that, pick 21 basically? So at that point, you're in the Mike
No, I think
Evans.
it's 19,
Oh, is
right?
it really 12
Yeah, because
picks and then
24 would
7?
be.
Yeah, yeah. So you're Drake London, Chris Olave, Mike Evans, Brandon Ayuk. Who you taking?
Say those names for me again, just a little slower.
Drake London, Chris
Uh huh.
Olave, Mike Evans, Brandon Ayuk.
Mm. I would say Brandon Ayuk. Here's my
Brandon
reason
Ayuk.
why. If he stays with the 49ers, you know he's their number one passing option. He was last year. He's going to be again this year, especially if CMC is in and out of the lineup. Debo's another one who kind of goes in and out of the lineup. So does Kittle. So I mean, Ayuk's been a mainstay. And then even if he gets traded to Pittsburgh, I mean, I know they're a team that's going to want to run the more, but he's going to be their number one option too. So I would be willing to take the risk on him. I don't believe in Drake London. Maybe it's just because I'm a Falcons hater. I don't.
I was going to say
I
this
like
is
the talent of Olave. I don't like the fantasy value of him in the second round.
this is a tricky situation for you to deal with because of the four receivers I mentioned. Three of them are divisional rivals to your Panthers, so
Right.
that's a tough decision to make. You know,
Well, and I feel like at some Mike Evans is at some point going to take a step back. I worry about that offense not having Dave Canales, and not just because he's the Panthers head coach, but that's always a tricky situation when you have a good offense and your coordinator leaves.
hmm I personally lean Olave in that situation. Metrics wise, he ticks all the boxes for me. And I don't have any grievances against the Saints. So for me, I'm more than
My thing, it's
happy.
not even a grievance against the Saints. I'm just like, when are you going to prove that you're that guy? Like, I think he's very good. I think he has a lot of talent, but he just never, I'm just waiting for that takeoff.
That's that's fair. I just think, but that's the
He would,
point.
it would be between him and it would be between Ayuk. It'd be between those two. To me, Mike
Point
Evans
though
in
of guys like
London,
Olave in London though, right? Is that like you're drafting them in the second round, knowing that both of them have the upside to be first round to jump into that tier two receiver conversation in terms of
I just
fantasy
don't
pro.
believe in London.
That's fair. I have my own issues with London,
What
which we can get
would
into, but
would Gibbs be available there? Because I would consider abandoning my strategy for him because that's a guy like Montgomery gets hurt
it's
or something
possible.
like that.
Yeah, I mean it's possible. Fantasy Pros has him as the 13th ranked player. I doubt he slips that far, personally. Um,
Yeah, he'll probably go before then. But if he was available, I'd probably take
in my mock drafts, at least, the hero running back strategy is getting a lot of love this year. So I
him.
expect running backs in that elite range to very good range to go off the board pretty much instantly. So with
Yeah,
that though, I will transition into I'll make the case for the hero running back strategy since I'm picking seventh, which actually seventh if you go off of at least the ratings that I'm looking at, the rankings that I'm looking at, seventh is actually a terrible place to try to execute the hero running back strategy because Brees, Bijan, and CMC should all be gone. But for the sake of argument, I'm going to say that you took Justin Jefferson at 5 and John took Bijan at 6 and left me with Brees Hall. Let's say I take Brees Hall at 7. So at
do
that
you
point,
believe Brees Hall's going to produce at that level to take him that high?
you know, I've I've flirted with this today because I've seen him go as high as 1 in my mock drafts, and I'm like, nothing about me feels like Brees Hall is worth it or feels like he is this undoubted top 3 running back in the league. But I also I look at it and I say, well, I'm one person. If he's consistently being ranked this highly between all these different ranking sites and in these mock drafts by a lot of different players, is it groupthink where everyone's just falling in line? Or is there something there that I'm missing? I'm more inclined to say that there's something there that I'm missing. So at that point, like, I'm willing to take the risk. Plus, it's one league. It's like,
Yeah,
I want to mix up my strategy a little bit across all the different leagues. So I'm open to trying it. I don't necessarily love Brees Hall personally. Like, I just don't see it, but there seems to be a consensus out there. So I'm willing to try it. So if I did take Brees Hall at 7, I'm coming back on the board then in 10 picks, right? So it's 17. So I'm landing then. Now I'm going to be in a similar position to where you are, where you were looking for your wide receiver two, I'm now looking for my wide receiver one. So at that point, you have Devontae Adams 18th ranked, Drake London 19th, Chris Olave 20th. Me personally, I've said it, I like Chris Olave the most in that section.
Yeah,
So I'd go Chris Olave as my wide receiver one.
because I just don't think because like you have the outside chance that Devontae Adams gets traded,
Yeah.
and that would be the only. You know, if he went to the Jets, that's the only way his taking him there is viable.
Yep.
Just because he could just play instantly.
So, I mean, it's the thing about that strategy is, do I think Justin Jefferson and Brandon Ayuk are a better 1-2 punch than Breece Hall and Chris Olave? I do. I think in that situation,
Your strategy is very potential based.
yeah, in that situation, like you won out, assuming that you don't make a mess of the rest of the draft and that you do a
Yeah,
good job of picking up on your running backs. I want to see, third pick wise, if I'm picking seventh, my third pick is 31st. So I still need to get that second receiver. So at that point, it's Cooper Kupp, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, Michael Pittman. So in that case, Cooper Kupp feels over the hill for me. DK Metcalf has never been an elite production receiver. I'm more likely to take the upside of like a DJ Moore who's a target hog. Even though they've
yeah.
added a lot to that offense, I still think he's going to get his, and he's got a much better quarterback to play with. So I really like that. Pittman, I like Pittman. I've long been a Pittman advocate, but the problem I have is just I don't trust Anthony Richardson to keep it going, if that makes sense. Like, I just don't think Anthony Richardson is going to produce enough as a quarterback for him.
That's too rich to take in the third round for me.
So if you were to get to the third round, so at this point, we said you would have Justin Jefferson and Brandon Ayuk. By the time you got to the third round, you're now looking at so you would have pick number 29. So that puts you in Jalen Hurts, Sam Laporta, Devon Achane, Travis Kelce, and then that group of receivers I just said. Who's it going to be? You going tight end, quarterback, running back here?
I'd go Hurts just because. So my ideal quarterback. We've talked about this enough that I don't feel like I'm divulging my strategy too much. I'd love to get Josh Allen. I think he's going to have a bunch of rushing touchdowns this season. Because he's going to have to be that offense. But I'm assuming he's already gone. He's typically the number one fantasy quarterback. I'm
Yes.
taking Hurts. There's still I still wonder how effective the tush push is going to be without Kelsey. They're still going to run it. I
It
mean,
did
Hurts
not
is
look. It
squatting
did
over.
not look good last night.
They got some things they have to work out. But I mean, the thing too is that offense is still going to score a lot.
Yeah.
So I still trust that he's not going to get 15 touchdowns again. He's still going to get like 8 rushing touchdowns.
And, who
So
knows? You may be in business. Josh Allen, 25th quarterback off the board, or 25th in ADP. So you could, I mean, if he falls four positions, you could end up with a perfect strategy. So, I mean, to your point, man, I really feel like the perfect place to execute that two wide receiver strategy would be like second, third pick, where you can get like a
yeah,
Tyreek Hill, CD Lamb, get a decent second one, and then have a shot at Josh Allen at the third turn. Like that would
especially
just be,
like getting the top 2 quarterbacks, top 3. It's so valuable because I mean, Josh Allen's going to average 23 to 25 points every week.
yep.
And that
Quarter.
just, I mean, if you have a quarterback getting you 18, I mean, that's a 7 point swing.
So I think to put a bow on this, I do think the through line here is that the strategy can be really hard to execute if you don't love the guys that are in the range that you're going to land. So I think when you get into a draft, assuming you don't know your position ahead of time, like we do for one of our drafts, right? Like we have a few that we're not going to know. As soon as you get in that draft, it's good to get in there early, identify your position, go ahead and look at your first 4 or 5 picks so that you have a general sense of like where each pick is going to be landing, what group of players. So that way you can say, okay, I am not comfortable with where a two wide receiver strategy puts me with that third pick, or I'm not comfortable with how I'm going to get a running back if I'm not, in the right spot. So looking ahead is definitely crucially important because
And
it sets up everything.
I would say too for like your first round pick, especially the top like picks 8 through 1. It's a little harder at the end of the first round, but you're going in thinking whoever I take has the potential to be the number one fantasy player in the league.
Yep.
What's their floor? Because you don't want to take a guy who's let's do running back where it's I'll pick on Brees Hall where it's like okay he does have the potential to be the number one fantasy player in the league. He also has the potential to be like the fifth or sixth running back.
Yeah.
And so while that's valuable, is that valuable with your first pick?
Yep. And talking about value, I want to segue into drafting a quarterback and tight end. I know you talked about where you leaned, and you've done a great job of segueing into our next topics, but you've talked about, how valuable it is to get one of those top three guys. And one of the things I'll say is that, with these redrafts, it's incredibly difficult to gauge when you need to pull a trigger on a quarterback or tight end because runs at those positions, so people swarming to get those players, can happen at any time. And you really don't want to be caught flat footed.
Right.
Um, but if you
Especially like a running quarterback. That's the usually the one that one starts going and they start flying off the board.
But if you take one too early, you're going to be leaving valuable ADP on the table. So what are your thoughts? What position between quarterback and tight end? 'Cause I think these are the two that people consider kind of like fading. Which are you more likely to fade, and which one are you more concerned with getting guys near the top?
So for me with quarterback, it's if I could get, a Josh Allen, Hurts, or Mahomes, and I would even throw in. I'm not going to take him this early, but I'm going to watch where he goes. Kyler Murray, just because of
Oh, I
his
thought
potential in fantasy.
I thought you'd say Lamar Jackson. He's the other one that Fantasy Pros has in their tier one.
Yeah, so my thing, like Mahomes can go off,
Yep.
and we just never know when that's going to happen. But at a minimum, he's going to get you like 35 passing touchdowns, which is valuable. Hurts and Allen can throw in the rushing ability. Um, if I don't get those guys, and Lamar, I will say I forgot about him. If I can't get some of those guys
Yep.
in like the third or fourth round, I'm fading that spot
And that's
because
that
those guys are just in a tier above everyone else.
and that is and I'll read out because I should have sent you this ahead of time, but I'll read out the tier for you. So that is tier one, those four guys you talked about, Allen, Hurts, Mahomes, and Jackson. Tier two, they have Anthony Richardson, which we can certainly discuss, CJ Stroud, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love. That feels like a pretty accurate representation of the second tier. And then the third
Yeah, and those
tier,
guys are going to go 5 and 7
yes.
rounds, I would say.
The third tier is Brock Purdy, Jaden Daniels, Tua Tagovailoa, Caleb Williams, Jared Goff, Trevor Lawrence. I mean, to your point, if I miss out on the top four, I don't think I'm giving up that much points to move from tier two to tier three if it means that I can gain an advantage elsewhere.
It's probably 3 to 4 points a week is what I would say.
Yeah. And, Jaden Daniels, really high upside pick because of that rushing ability. Like, look at where Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray are, right? If you can get that same value out of a Jaden Daniels in that tier three bracket where you're taking him in like the seventh round, or probably closer to like the ninth or 10th round. Like, that's a huge value.
Well, and I think too, like there are always guys. Mike Evans went later than expected last year. I mean, there are always wide receivers that fall where it's like, oh, this guy, I could have drafted him in the fourth round. Instead, I got him in the eighth.
Yep.
So I think like while it's valuable, like you want to. This is going to be such an obvious thing what I'm about to say. You want to get as many top guys at their position as you can, right? Or in that top tier. And so
Well,
if I
yeah.
have a shot to get a quarterback, see, I think tight end is a little different, where it's like, you know, Laporta's probably going to produce like a third or fourth round pick. Same with Kelsey. Like I don't know that they're going to exceed that. Like I don't think Kelsey's going to. We're not getting 110 catches for 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns anymore. I don't think he's that player. He'll still be one of the top fantasy tight ends, but you're not really getting any value. Like it's like, yeah, this guy went right where he was supposed to, maybe a little lower. Like I don't think Laporta is going to produce that much more than what he did last year, to where it's like, wow, I got to steal in the third round to take him.
So let's transition into tight ends since you brought it up. And I think we've done a good job of talking about the quarterback grouping. So tier one, according to Fantasy Pros, Sam Laporta, Travis Kelsey, Mark Andrews, Trey McBride. I
Wow,
don't.
I'm surprised Trey McBride's up there.
People are really, really high on him. He seems to be. He seems to just be a steady kind of. I don't want to say unquestioned, but like unchallenged, which is basically the same thing.
Well, he was good
Unchallenged
last year.
tier one player, which to me is a little surprising. Tier two, Dalton Kincaid, George Kittle, Kyle Pitts, Evan Ingram, Jake Ferguson. Okay, so here's my thing. I'm actually comfortable with anybody in tier two except for Kyle Pitts, because
Yeah,
I'm not ready to be hurt again. Like Jake Ferguson, for example, Cowboys tight end. Dak Prescott has always relied on his tight ends, and they are always fantasy viable. So like the idea of getting a Jake Ferguson versus Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, like Mark Andrews and Travis Kelsey are old. I don't know that they're going to produce more than
Mark
Jake
Andrews
Ferguson
had a
this year.
bad injury last year.
Yeah. So like I'm really to me, tight end is the position between quarterback and tight end. I'm much more likely to fade tight end this year because I'm so happy with the depth. I mean, Pat
Well, and
Fry,
my sleeper guy is a tight end,
Pat Fry is 13th ranked tight end. Like, come on.
and that
So
offense is going to be better.
yeah. So it's just interesting. I know Arthur Smith ruined Kyle Pitts. I'll never forgive him for that. It could have been Kyle Pitts though. Like we don't know. He may actually be able to because that's the other thing. Like you look at how Jonnu Smith performed with Arthur Smith, uh, and he was quite well. He was quite good. So Pat
Well,
Fryman
and I'll
predicted
say
is a better
too
tight end.
about drafting a tight end is I'm comfortable with that tier one or tier two, but especially that tier two, you have to take them where they're projected to go because if you miss out, you've got basically nothing at tight end.
Yeah.
And that's never like
I
we've
mean,
all
but
had that team where it's like you can survive, but it's very difficult.
I mean Dallas Goddard's down there tier three.
He never produces.
I mean, I'm just saying. Like, I think it's about mitigating your losses when it comes to fading a position. Um,
But I think at that point in the draft, I'm drafting potential.
Fair enough. So Brock Bowers, maybe something like that. We'll see.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So let's talk defense and kicker. Kind of talking about some of these positions outside of the big two, wide receiver and running back. Defense and kicker. Do they matter? Is really what I want to know. So, you know, do you subscribe to drafting kickers and defenses with the plan of playing them all season, or are you kind of, you know what, I'm just going to go matchup dependent. I'm not going to worry about taking a top defense. I'm going to go based on who's playing who and what week.
So for kicker, I like to have a guy who I know is going to make his field goals. I'd rather just have a consistent, like, you're getting me my points every week. Sometimes they'll explode, as opposed to these guys where it's just volatile every week. Sometimes they're missing three field goals. I don't want to mess with that. So I'd rather just get one of the good kickers and ride that out for the season. Defense, you got to mix and match because defense isn't as dominant as it used to be. Um, I remember it was the 2018 season. I had the Bears defense, and that was when they were the best defense in the league, forcing all those turnovers. If you end up with that defense, you stick with them because it's just so valuable to have. But that I think is such a volatile spot. You never know what's going to happen. Inevitably, my strategy in the past couple of years has been try and pick up the defense that's playing one of the bottom five offenses in the league, and usually that works.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I'm not. So here's my thing. I would never use a bench spot to put a defense or kicker on during a bye week. So I have no
I
desire in
would if I
keeping.
had like the top defense or one of the top kickers.
I just don't think. I mean, it just doesn't. I'd much rather I value my bench spots too much for that. Like for me, if I had, so say I'm drafting, right? There's this tier two set of kickers, which is like Jake Moody of the 49ers, Jake Elliott of the Eagles, Tyler Bass of the Bills, Young Hoku of Atlanta, and then Evan McPherson, Cincinnati. Great. All of those guys, I think, are going to be consistent extra point kickers, field goal kickers, because their offenses can move the ball and get them into
Right.
field goal range. And like, great. Any one of those guys, you can probably pick up. If it's a 15 round draft, you can probably pick them up in round 14 and you can play them until their bye week, right? So if it's Young Hoku, Evan McPherson, or Tyler Bass, that gives you 12 weeks with them. I'm dropping them for that bye week, and then I'm just gonna grab somebody else like who's had a good year at that point because I've had 12 weeks of data. I'll be able to kind of figure out who can replace them. Like it just to me, it's just not valuable to unless at that point I have a bench player that I'm like, all right, you know what? Yeah, we can say bye
Well,
in 2 weeks.
inevitably, I have one or two of those spots every year on the bench where it's like, I'm just not getting anything from this. They're not seeing the field. They've ended up becoming like the third string wide receiver. And then it's like, all right, why am I keeping you around?
What I will say is, if I was a good fantasy manager, I would have bench spots that open up because I would be drafting guys late in the draft to fill out my roster who are rookies who have the potential to explode or have like a Keon Coleman, right? Like if I
Yeah.
take Keon Coleman, he's a bench player for me to start the year, and I'm going to give him 4 or 5 weeks to say, okay, does he pop up as the new Stephon Diggs in Buffalo, or is Curtis Samuel a target hog and they really are going to run that offense through the running back and tight end? Well, at that point, I can potentially cut him and sign a kicker, which I think actually makes somebody like Harrison Butker or Jake Elliott really valuable because they have earlier buys at week 5 and week 6. So it's like you can do that evaluation period for rookies on your roster, cut one, cover that bye week, and then cut that kicker after that week. And then you get that spot again to kind of continue to leverage it for other things, right?
Yeah. Cause I think inevitably, like, you're just going to, whether it's like the rookie you took or someone else where they just never pan out. Cause the same as that you have the data on the kickers, you have the data on this player. If after
Yeah.
12 weeks, they haven't scored more than 6 points in a week, odds are they're not going to.
Okay, so we talked. You said it earlier. You highlighted it, but you have a player that you're really high on, that you think you will take above their ADP, and I know that this is one of the hardest questions to answer truthfully because we are drafting two positions apart, and we
Well, I mean,
don't.
we did agree we weren't gonna,
Yes,
steal someone's pick.
we have a written agreement here that we will not use this information against each other. So I will let you go first. Who is a player that you are really optimistic about?
My player is Dalton Kincaid. I think there's a reason why he was drafted so high by the Bills, and he had a fine rookie season. Stephon Diggs is gone. So, Gabe Davis is gone. And yes, they brought in a rookie wide receiver. They brought in Curtis Samuel. He is what he is at this point. He's probably a number three receiver, kind of a little bit of a gadget guy. Um, they have James Cook, his load, I imagine, is gonna increase on this offense, but Dalton Kincaid is gonna be the main pass catcher in my eyes, unless was it Coleman's their rookie wide receiver?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Unless he absolutely takes off, Dalton Kincaid's the number one option. I'm taking him around early for
Okay.
where he's going. I believe in him that much that I will make sure that I get him.
I love it. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think that second half of last year, you saw the Bills basically, and it's the reason Stephon Diggs is no longer there, that he basically became a pedestrian in that offense, and it was entirely Allen, Kincaid, and Cook.
Can I
And
segue into my bust too?
sure,
Because
sure.
it's the perfect segue. It's Stephon Diggs. He's in an offense with way too much talent. He's on the wrong side of 30. We saw an offense where he was the number one weapon. He got replaced, and they just let him go. They didn't try and they didn't even bring they didn't try and get anything from the Texans to replace him. Or go out in free agency to try to really replace him. They got some, as I mentioned, number three receivers. They did draft a rookie, but rookie receivers don't always take off year one. So they did basically nothing to fill that void because his void isn't as big as everyone wants us to believe it is.
Very nice. Yeah, no, I think that that's a great pick. I think Diggs, Devontae Adams, these are guys who just a few
Oh yeah,
years ago,
Devontae's going way too high.
these are guys who just a few years ago felt like can't miss players. Those guys that were anchoring your two wide receiver strategy. But now I just think I think it's a huge detriment to your team if you're trying to make one of those guys your top two receivers at this point in their careers. All right. Let me go into who I'm really high on. He is the wide receiver 62, and he is not even the first wide receiver on his team, but based on the production over his career and his raw intangibles, and the fact that he should be getting some decent quarterback play this year as they upgraded the position, I believe Jahan Dotson is a player that is somebody you can target late in drafts and potentially get a breakout season from, a la Nico Collins, right? Where it's like the base stats have been there, the athleticism is there, everything you need is there. It just hasn't popped yet. So if you're looking at somebody that you could potentially stash on your bench and get a lot of production out of, and that can suddenly work their way into that flex conversation, maybe not enough to upset your wide receiver one and two, especially if you go with that two wide receiver strategy. But he's somebody that I think can work his way into flex conversation, and he's
Well,
somebody that I'm really targeting.
you went deep for that pick.
I did. I did. That's, me though. Like, I did it last year. Like, I'm always concerned with my receivers on my bench and like building out a good receiving bench because you just never know. And that flex position is so valuable to be able to fill that I really like to go there, for my picks. Let's see, for player, I would probably, fade a player that I think is fairly overrated given what they did last year would be Rashad White. So he's running back 13 ahead of guys like James Cook, Kenneth Walker, um, really even Ramondre Stevenson, right? Like here's the thing about Rashad White. If you look into his stat line last year, it was entirely based on volume. He was an incredibly inefficient running back, one of, if not the least efficient running backs in the league last year. That offense is going to look different. They've got a new offensive coordinator. They also added Bucky Irving, who's going to potentially eat into some of those touches. And the thing about inefficient running backs is that they are so volume dependent. So if anyone threatens their touches, they instantly lose their value. So I am fading Rashad White. He is on my do not draft list because I am just too concerned about threats from Bucky Irving and Baker Mayfield in that passing attack. There's just, to me, volume guys are scary. And he doesn't bring a ton to the receiving game either, so he can't save you with upside there. You're better off with a James Cook, a Kenneth Walker. I think you're better off with a Ramondre Stevenson, who's absolutely going to be the focal point of the Patriots offense. So, those are three guys that I would rather have instead of Rashad White, who are currently going, significantly further down than him. All right. Well, do you have anything to add, Billy, before I send us off?
One key piece of advice that I never follow is when in doubt, take a guy from a good offense because
Yeah.
you know they're going to produce at some level. If you get the number one, target for the Panthers, he's got a ceiling.
Who is that number one target? Deontay Johnson or Adam Thielen?
I still think it's going to be Thielen.
I do too. There's a lot of love for Johnson out there, but I just think Thielen is
He
such a
drops a lot of passes.
yes, he does, and Thielen is such a good safety blanket for a young quarterback, and Bryce knows him, and he knows where he's going to be. that connection's too good. I don't see it going any other way. All right, well, that does it for us today. Billy, another great discussion. I look forward to talking again next week as we get closer to draft day. For those of you listening, don't forget to rate and subscribe to the show. As always, you can get in touch with us through email at hecklerspod@gmail.com. I don't think we've gotten an email yet, so